Hi goalies, I'm Brian Daccord. Welcome to the Fuel Podcast.
Hi, I'm Steve Brown. Welcome.
So we've got an interesting little take on today's podcast. We're doing something a little bit different. And so Steve has a lot of experience working with the military, and I have a lot of experience working with goalies. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at military and some of the things that you work with the your clients and the different organizations you work with, and then we're going to kind of parlay them into the goalie world, and we can see kind of what can the goalies take out of what you're doing when you work with the military. All righty.
Okay.
So I'm going to start off, and we talked in one of the earlier podcasts about embrace the grind, right? But I want to start off with this feeling from a team or a unity standpoint, and how soldiers may identify themselves with the group, or with, whether they're in the Navy or the Army or the Air Force or whatnot, and maybe parlay that and look at maybe how a soldier looks at his role in the group, as a instrumental part of that group, and maybe as a goalie we can parlay it maybe in a goalie and how the goalie fits in with the team, right? So I'm going to hand it off to you, and we can talk a little bit about how a soldier views his role in the unit.
Sure. It's a great question, right? I think the first thing I think about is leadership. Right. So
first thing you think about is leadership.
I think every branch has constructs in there to make somebody feel like a part of something, right? You have basic training in general to get the person physically prepared, right? But also to have a shared experience, right? You have a shared experience of stress that now creates something that since you've gone through basic. If you're in, you've gone through buds, you've gone through selection, you've gone through this process, right? That now you're different, right? And now everybody who's gone through that process, there's a community aspect.
There's a bond.
Yes. So I think anytime you go through stress together, it forms that connection, or it promotes that. The other piece to it is really leadership, and how well do you have a shared culture and a shared mission. And how well does that disseminate to everyone that's in your, whether it be we can go from like a battalion level, we can go to a company level, if you're in the military, in the Army. But basically, how do you share that vision, and how much ownership and how much stake do people feel that they have a part of that? And to me, when I think of forming those community and forming that bond at the military level, it really comes down to the leadership, and how much they allow other people to feel that they have some control or influence within that situation to help themselves or to help others.
So they feel like they have an input.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be making decisions, but it makes you feel like what you're doing, no matter how menial the task is of importance and relevance, right? Okay. And if you feel that, hey, this has a larger meaning than just this, right? Like, I am here for larger meaning, right? There's something of value to that, right? Most people, or I shouldn't say most, because everyone has different reasons for joining the military. But those who join the military because it's mission focused, right? Or like those values, right? They can usually kind of handle that, right? They usually do a pretty good job at that. Now, there's always going to be stressors, there's always going to be adversity to that, which are going to kind of impact that. But those people that go in with those kind of values that are kind of highlighted, you think about the athlete who's kind of like a mercenary and just kind of playing on a team, like the goalie that's
they're on a different team every year.
Yeah, right. Or you ask them what team they're on, they don't even know what team they're going to the game, right?
They look down like,
exactly, right?
Who am I playing for?
There's a really hard, and goalie's an interesting position because you've kind of viewed it as it's a different sport, right? Yeah. Because it's hard to connect, right, when you feel like you're just shifting, right? So it really comes down to, and we talked about this a previous podcast ago, about why do you love this, right? What is it about that, right? So it's leadership who can create a culture, and we've talked about culture as, hey, you're safe, right? That not only are you safe, you're cared for, and that we're going to push you hard because we know that we can bring out the best in you, right? Those are the best cultures, right?
It's pretty good culture.
Right, like if you can create a culture and an environment like that, that's the best, that's the gold standard, right? And so as a team, if you can kind of use those same kind of guidelines and you can promote that culture within it, well, then I'm going to have people that feel like they can grow, people that have pushed themselves, people that go through discomfort to get there.
So it's funny, when you were talking about going through the different levels, I was picturing a brawl that I was part of. And it was in Switzerland. It's a very famous brawl. It was every single person was on the ice fighting. Coaches, they had the police. It was a zoo. And boy, did it bring the team together. You know, like,
Sure.
Unbelievable. And obviously it's a different era now. But when you think about, when you're talking about the importance of going through things together, I was thinking about that brawl, and then I was thinking about how goalies have to invest in their team. Because we're different.
Sure.
We play a different sport within a sport. We have different roles and responsibilities, so on and so forth. And I think when you were talking, I was just thinking how important it is to be part of it, right? To be from the onset, from the beginning of the year, you know, to be with the guys or the girls, right? And bond. Because that's what's going to help you down the road, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key factors of resilience, right, is being able to rely on others, right, and being able to reach out to others. If you feel, you know, Marcus Aurelius has a quote, like, if you're at a wall, right, and you're trying to climb over that wall because the enemy's coming, and there's somebody on top of that wall that's going to put out a hand, are you going to be too proud to reach for it, right, or are you just going to stand there and get taken out? And I think part of that is, as a goalie, by connecting with others, right? If I connect with others, well, then I'm building, and if I have relationships with others, then I'm building in like this resilience and support system that can help me after a bad game or help me after I give up a bad goal, right? Like, so many goalies are so dependent on making that first save, right, to feel calm, right? You go into situations, you're a little bit anxious, and almost every goalie I've ever worked with has shared that until they make that first save, they're very anxious, right? And that's unnerving. Well, who are you afraid you're going to let down? You're afraid you're going to let down your teammates, right? You're afraid you're going to let down maybe others and people's opinions about yourself. But if I go into that game and
I'm sorry, when you're saying this, all I'm thinking about is when you talk about you're afraid of something that hasn't happened yet, and it's in the future. That means you're not in the moment.
Yep.
See, I'm learning from you, Steve. I hope you're getting stuff out of this podcast, because I'm getting things out of the podcast, everyone.
Well, no, it's really important. Like, if you can kind of lower, there's strategies and skills you can to kind of build up your resistance to that on an individual level. Yeah. But having better connections with your teammates, right, and forming those relationships will kind of give you a little cushion there, right? It gives you a little bit more, probably bring down the stress a little bit more in that moment.
Yeah, and I would say, like, let's go like to a youth level or whatever. When the whole team goes away for that first tournament at Lake Placid, and a parent, I don't want him to miss Thursday and Friday of school. And I understand, like, he shouldn't miss Thursday and Friday of school, but I know that's the time that everybody's going to bond. And if you don't make that trip, you don't go to that tournament with the guys, then you're out. And when you don't have that bond or that chemistry, you know, it's kind of like the college guys. Like, you got to go out with the guys. You got to go out, or the girls, right? When there's a team party, like, you got to go. When there's a team function, you got to go. Because if you don't, there's a little disconnect that happens. And that disconnect is just one of those little things that you can actually control, right? You can control whether you build those relationships, but building those relationships are important.
Yeah, it's shared experience, right? The more shared experiences, the more you're trying to add to culture, right? And culture comes in so many different ways, right? It comes proximity, right? Like the more I'm with you, right? It's the little nicknames, right? And it's supposing that everybody's not picking on each other, right? And that's not like making one feel lower than the other, right? But that it's like, hey, this is what we do in this environment, right? That we're going to kind of joke. It's the inside jokes. It's those things that allow people and teams to grow and to kind of form. So we always talk about what's your identity as an individual player, but the best teams, or every team has an identity of its own, right? Every team every year should have a new identity, right? Like it's always morphing, right?
You replace one player, you got a new team.
Exactly.
One player, you got a new team. It's unbelievable.
And even if you never replace players, age decline of talent, right? Like another person increases,
pecking order changes,
so
totem pole.
No team is ever the same, right? And so it's always a different model, right? It's always reinventing yourself, right? It's always, and part of that is building those things, putting yourself under stress, talking about it, and engaging.
Okay, so I got this one for you. As a goaltender, you got some highs. Oh man, you get a shutout, you beat the #1 team in the country, you're top of the world, and then you get smoked and you get yanked out of the game. So your second set of Ds have been on the ice for every goal, and that guy fell over backwards on a one-on-one and you got scored on, then you get yanked and you're on the bench and that kid's still playing. How does the military approach failure? And you know, if someone is assigned with a task and they're unsuccessful with the task?
Yeah, I think, well, from my perspective, when I would work with a soldier, and I was working with the Army, so soldiers, right? Okay. Or if I was working with a unit, what we would teach them is the idea that one that we've expressed here before is about cordoning off the mistake, right? That the mistake's a one-time, one thing. Right?
One event.
It's a one event, right? Okay. It's a one-off thing. It's not something, again, we want to separate the incident we want to separate the poor play or the poor, in a soldier's case, the poor result, right? Yeah. From the actual person, right? Like that's not a reflection of you, it's a mistake that you made. We can improve this, right? And we're willing to work with you on it, and you should be willing to work on it too. And then it's about cordoning off it, right? So if a goalie makes a bad, gives up a goal, right? It's a soft goal, right? Okay. We'll coordinate off. What were the controllable things? What did you not do? Was your blocker not up? Like, what was the technical thing that you were missing, right? And then the same exact process goes through that. There's an AAR process, basically, after you go through an incident, right, where you're going to kind of evaluate in the Army, right? And you're going to look at and you're going to reflect on what happened during that when you were doing that.
AAR?
AAR, yeah. So an after action review.
Okay.
Right, that you're going to kind of do that.
Review.
And you do that.
I don't play enough COD. I would probably know that.
But you do that as a coach, so your goalie coach or positional coach is going to do that with you after a game, right? Yeah. You're going to go over the tape, you're going to go over the film, and you're going to talk about it, right? Yeah. So a lot of the systems that are in place, like the Army and the military has systems in place to kind of go through this, right? To kind of digest it and to kind of help people grow, right? And the best teams should have systems too, right? Like, so what's your
How are we going to do this?
Exactly.
And if we lose a game, how are we going to approach this? What are we going to do? What's the system?
Yeah, and what's your feedback, right? Like, so how do you receive the feedback, right? Do people get preferential treatment, right? Yes or no, right? Does everyone get a fair thing, right? So after they go, do they have the opportunity to practice those skills and develop them, right? So everything should be purposeful, but you take that information and then you try to translate it into forward progress.
So let me ask you this. Goaltending's stressful. Being a soldier is stressful. Mm-hmm. They get put in stressful situations. So here you are, you start the game, you're excited, you're ready to go, you give up 3 goals in the first 10 minutes and you're like, oh my God, I've given up 3 goals on 10 shots. I'm still in the game, thank God. But I've got a nightmare, and now you start to stress. Now you start, your mind's going, you're thinking about getting scored on again, and I'm going to get pulled. I gave up one more goal, the game's over, I'm going to get pulled. So from a soldier standpoint, when they're in a battle, and all of a sudden there's bullets flying and there's stress, what are some of the things that you teach those people to handle that stress at that moment when it happens?
So you're really looking at a few things, right? And the first thing is really getting control of your physiology, right?
Your body,
and really it's your breath, right? Slow exhales, right? Slow the exhale down. If you're under that much stress in the situation that you described, it's going to be very difficult, but you direct yourself to a purposeful action, right? This is what I got to do. Like, it might be just get down, right? It might be seek cover, right? It might be, fire, whatever.
So you have
whatever it is, right? Yeah. But you, in order to get there, right? Because maybe your response was freeze, right? Or maybe it was, you know what I mean? Maybe you had a response you weren't expecting. Maybe it was you weren't sure what was going to happen. You work on the breath, right? And it's really about the exhale so that you can start to gain some control over your body. Now, hopefully you've done like field training exercises and you've done things where you've been under stress before. And I think that's part of what you try to do as a coach is put people under stress.
Right?
So
that they've been there,
and
done
I think
that.
that's what military training is supposed to do in a way too, whether explicitly or implicitly, is to put people under stress, not so that they become hardened, but that they know how to deal with it, right? And that they become, hey, this is familiar and I can...
That's interesting what you just said.
What?
So sometimes coaches do things to toughen up or harden up their players. But you said the training isn't to harden them up, it's to what?
To me, it's to make them prepared.
To prepare them.
And then to give...
Which is, it's two different things.
Yeah,
right?
I think you're trying to develop self-efficacy that I can handle this situation, right? Like that it's not about, that it's about, at the end of the day, if I have the belief that I can control or influence this situation for the better, that gives me a little bit more presence of mind, clarity of mind, than if it was just me thinking just like a robot, right? You know what I mean? Like, because now I can kind of think, now I can still be present, now I can do what I need to.
And the first thing is the breath.
Yeah.
So
breath.
are you familiar with the show The Good Doctor?
No.
Okay, so The Good Doctor is a show about an autistic doctor. And so they had an episode not too long ago. And he starts to panic to an extent, and then he has this image of his brother. And it says, blow out 3 candles. So think about it, blow out 3 candles. So to blow out 3 candles, deep inhale. So basically it was the trigger of 3 breaths.
Yeah.
And then to settle down.
Well, I like that too, because the situation that you described is incredibly stressful, and you're going to default to pictures, right?
What does that mean, default to pictures?
So when you learned how to walk, or your children learned how to walk or, eat for the first time, they didn't read a manual, right?
They just did it.
They did it because they observed you.
Okay, so they saw.
So you see, right? So because we see things, we think in pictures. Like our visual processes were there way before our language ability as humans, right? Not just
because we couldn't speak. Yeah,
exactly. And not just, you know what I mean? You're going back.
Sure.
So our pictures are like hardwired a little bit differently, right? So if you can elicit an image in your head of something like that, right, the 3 candles, and you can practice that, and you're putting it into all your training exercises, or you're putting it in, and I think application is so important for what we're trying to do with, if I think about a goalie, like, it's one thing for me to talk with them one-on-one, it's still that next step of them being able to apply it, right? And so it's like the military uses a crawl, walk, run methodology, right?
What's that?
So if I'm trying to develop anything, like you gotta crawl first, then you're gonna walk, and then you can run. So before you even hopefully before you ever get to that firefight or that thing, you have gone through training where you've crawled, you've walked, and you've run, and now you're in this stressful situation. Well, hopefully along that way, if thinking about that candles or blowing out those candles was a thought that was going to help you kind of stay relaxed, when you were crawling, you were thinking about it. When you were walking, you were thinking about it. When you were running, you were thinking about it. So now you're under stress, and now all you have to do is just think of the picture and blow out the candle, right? And now I'm back in it. So we have breath, and really it's about 1.5 to 2 times as long on the exhale as it is on your inhale.
Okay.
So it's a misnomer to say just take a deep breath. It's really about take a deep exhale. Second is
the exhale is the key.
Exhale is the key.
Why is the exhale more important than the inhale?
Because that's what's going to elicit the vagus nerve. That's what's going to get the parasympathetic nervous system activated. That's what's going to allow you to kind of calm down. It's that exhale. You know, there's also that carbon dioxide oxygen piece too. So
like
it's really
getting out.
It's just
I
the
got
exhale.
you.
The other piece is expanding your vision, right? Panoramic vision, right?
So I tell everybody that from I think an earlier podcast about softening your gaze.
So if you can do that, right? Because think about it, in a firefight, boom, you're locked in, right? And your body, everything gets rigid, everything gets tight, right?
You get singularly focused.
Yeah.
You're here, and then you get tense because you're here, but you broaden your gaze.
Sure.
We talked about that in an earlier podcast, looking down the ice and then picturing the boards and the stands. I love that. I tell everybody that.
And so that's really...
I take credit for it. It's mine.
It wasn't...
It's all me. I came up with it, not Steve. That Steve Brown guy.
I'll tell you, it wasn't me, right? So there's lots of people that before that... I mean, there's a lot of people that do great work in this stuff. And, I mean, we just kind of, at my level, disseminate with the work that they did. So those are really your top 2, right? Like ways. There's other ways sometimes with kind of like making like a sigh, right? Like, right? They kind of make that sigh sound that can also kind of impact you a little bit. But, you know, that's a little bit tougher and maybe not something you're going to do right in that moment. But then one of the other things that I think the military does very well is they teach you and they drill into you what you're supposed to do in certain situations, right? Like we've all been on an airplane and they kind of tell you, you know...
Yeah, you don't pay attention.
But no one's paying attention, right? So if the plane ever went down, it's like everybody's going to be all over the place.
Exactly.
One of the things that I think NCOs do in the military, the people that kind of train your units at that level, at least for the Army, is they do that really well. So you really understand what you're supposed to do in those situations under stress, so that you can take that breath and just follow that pattern and do what I'm supposed to do, right? And I think if I think about what you guys do at Stop It, right? The way you've described it is that it's a continually building, you're building the blocks, you're going through these modules, right? You're going through this coaching and you're just trying to reinforce it over and over again so that it becomes automatic, right? So that it becomes something that I know what to do, right? And so I think that's very similar in we're going to drill it, and then that repetition is going to become automatic.
Yeah. And the same thing that we're trying to do, you know. So I think as goalies, what we're trying to develop is all the mechanics, all the systems, all the strategies that happen, right, without having to think about it. So you just play. And I think what I'm getting out of this is that in order to just play, I have to have crawl, walk, go through that system. But once I have that in me, if I can calm my central nervous system with the breaths, if I can calm down, then I can go from that to, okay, now everything else will kick in once I take my breaths. And something you said earlier too, physiologically change, right? And I've always said this, like, all right, if you're on the ice and not feeling it, well, you better get your chest up and get your arms out and just make your body, right, take the posture that's going to make you stronger.
Yeah, there's a lot of research that says that, right? Like that, I mean, there's work on power poses and things like that, where if I'm in a certain position, that certain hormones get released and certain ones don't, right? And that's important, right? And the other piece is, and we've talked about this before, is tell yourself you're excited, right? Tell
yourself.
Yeah, if I'm a goalie and I start to get stressed, physiologically, a lot of the same things.
Same thing.
You know, stress, excitement, right? But if you view it as excitement, the protein cytokines that don't get released versus one can be huge, have a huge impact on your performance, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just about, and all that is a mental switch, right? But you can't just put that in, if I work with a goalie, I can't trust them to be able to just do that on delivery, right? So we talked about it, right?
Yeah.
It's really the onus then shifts to them, and that's why coaches' education on this stuff is so important. Where like if I can share that with a goalie, but if every positional coach in like whatever league knows that, then in practice, when they see them start to get stressed, hey, just tell yourself you're excited, right? Or take a breath, right?
Yeah.
If it gets reinforced in those moments, that's where the changes would get made, right? Yeah. I can plant the seed, or I can help them start to think about it, but the follow through comes with the coach, right? The follow through comes with the teammates coaching and supporting that, and that allows that to grow.
So, what do you do? How does the military handle when they have to select? So there's a mission, and that guy's going, that guy's not going. And then how do you, and it's the same idea with the goalie, right? Like the whole team's going out to play, except you're not selected. You're not chosen to play. The military has missions, and they'll go, you're not fit for this mission. How do you deal with those guys?
Yeah, I think that's difficult, right? Like,
it's probably very difficult, right? Like that's real life.
Yeah, and I can't speak like 100% because I've been involved in those decisions, right? For the military, or you know what I mean? Like I've talked to them like after the fact and things like that, but I've never been like privy to that decision-making process, right? But I think one of the things that goes into it is very similar, right? Is like you have to make a decision that's best for that situation, right? Yeah. And at that
point, like a coach who's trying to win a game,
And if you look back at like a coach, right? And if I'm looking at a coach to put the best position, right? Like you're always weighing pluses and minuses, right? And how you index it is going to be different for every person. And that's why it's good, to try to take in as much information as you can without getting analysis by paralysis. But by gathering information, asking what's needed, getting the intel about, either the site or what the conditions are.
What you get, and then you get back into the communication part of it.
Yeah, right. And then you're
so much easier when you communicate and people hear, then you don't have to spend that time trying to figure it out, trying to think about it, right? Trying to, why aren't I playing, or why wasn't I selected for that mission? Why? Like, it just, so as much as we can try to explain it, and I think it's important too when it comes to the goalies. It's like, hey, it's coach's decision. You don't have to understand it. Right? You probably don't understand it. You don't have to try to reason it out. It is what it is. Well, accept it and move on. At some point, you got to accept it and move on.
The advantage that the military has is they have such a strong chain of command, right? So that whatever gets disseminated to somebody, that's just what you do, right? And so the structure of chain of command is kind of built in. Right, so if someone comes down with a decision, you just do it. Right, you run into trouble when teams and organizations don't have a chain of command. Right, like, and you can tell, right, when there's pushback and there's disgruntledness. Right, like,
so it's so funny you say that, because it goes back to an earlier podcast where that's probably a big reason why there's so many issues, is because there's really no set protocols and chain of command when it comes down to some of the issues that we're dealing with, because it's not the Army, it's not years of making sure you're getting that system done. Interesting. Learn something every day on the podcast here. But once again, we're out of time.
That was fun.
But I just military. I ambushed Steve on this one. I didn't tell him what the topic was going to be, because I knew this was his specialty, and I was going to let him kind of do his thing with it. So, but I appreciate all your feedback and all your intel on that, and I appreciate you guys watching. If you want to go watch the primers, that we do a daily primer about a minute each day. Get your mindset in place, and then Steve has an assignment every Sunday, and you can find them all on our Fuel Athletic Success Training YouTube site. So wish you the best of luck, keep kicking, and hopefully we'll see you at our next podcast.
Have a great day.